pattern or principle or precept throughout the entire New Testament which says target the lost, especially in the unreached, by giving them their physical needs in hope to open a door to the spiritual. I believe that everything that we have throughout the New Testament points to this. You target the sinner's sin, their conscience. That's what you target, because that's where the work of the Holy Spirit takes place. Fourth, so we partner new missionaries with mentors. We plant churches independent from inception, propagate the gospel by targeting the sinner's conscience. Number four, we pattern autonomous ministry, which can be replicated by the faith and finances of the national believers alone. When missionaries go over to the foreign field, many times they want to add everything that they need to make their ministry outreach a success, whether that be sports equipment or sound systems or anything like that. But we believe that to pattern an autonomous church plant ministry that the nationals can follow, then the missionary needs to give them a pattern where they rely only on things that are available in that culture and can be budgeted into a brand new local church birthed on the field's budget, where they can budget and trust God and work towards and get it without having to send for it from across the seas, or these things are way beyond our budget. Listen, I was at a coffee shop just a few weeks back near my world headquarters of GFF. And the guy was telling me about why the coffee is so good. One reason is because he has a $20,000 espresso coffee machinery right there. He gets his coffee roasted beans from Italy. He doesn't get those locally. All right, so here we have two examples. The beans from Italy are available, but they're from overseas, right? We wouldn't think that would be appropriate at all in planting a church, relying on things from overseas in order to help out. But listen, that $20,000 coffee equipment was able to be gotten as a part of that greater American Pennsylvanian culture. It's available there. Well, guess what? I can't afford that. And there are things in the culture in Africa or India or wherever that the church, it's available in their culture. We can't afford that. We can't use that. Well, that's exactly the same as a missionary. A missionary could say, well, these things are available in the culture. Yeah, but are you setting up a pattern for the national church to follow that they can minister within their means, that is by their faith and finances, without misplacing their faith in things rather than God? So the last couple of things here, partnering, planting, propagating, patterning, is that we promote the gospel among the unreached, the underreached, and the misreached. That are those who have no gospel witness in their language or their culture, and no one in a similar language or culture that should be reaching out to them with the gospel. The underreached would be those who typically have no or little access to any gospel in their language or culture. However, there are those of similar language or culture that don't live in their country or their people group, but their culture and their language is similar enough, they could go to them, and they're just in the next country over, or they're just the next people group over, but they're not bringing the gospel to them. And then there's the misreached. Those are those who would be like in an animist situation, and then you have churches that are either of a Catholic or a charismatic background who introduce Christ to them, crucified and risen and coming again, but they effectively changed the crude shackles of animism to the sophisticated handcuffs of a religious Christianity that doesn't save. They have been reached, but they have been misreached with a gospel that does not save. And then finally, we provide a proactive rather than a reactive approach to full missionary care. And with that idea, I'm going to introduce Brother Chris Lupino to come up if he will. He's going to lead the first session on missionary care as it relates to the stress that missionaries go through based on the trauma that they can expect in their life. And then we're going to have a 10-minute break and come back for another session. The three things to remember this morning about our schedule is that our sessions, there are 5 sessions, 45 minutes each. And there are about a 5 to 10 minute break in between each one. That's the first thing to remember. The second thing to remember is that wherever we are in our sessions, at 12:15 we're having lunch. We should have 3 sessions under our belts by 12:15. All right. The third thing that we need to know is that even though we have 2 sessions after lunch, the final session is probably going to start around 2 or just before 2 o'clock, and then we can end at 2:15 or 3:30. That is wide open, totally up to you guys, all right? So with that, I'm going to ask Brother Chris if you'll come and start session number 1.
Okay, thanks, Brother Rodney. Great to be with you, men. We're never concerned by how many pastors show up at a table talk or laymen. We just want to, we gather together to provoke thinking among pastors about missions. Pastor, you're at a bit of a disadvantage because sort of the way it works is first time in a church we talk about trauma, so it's the first time we've been here. And Pastor Hammond knows a lot about trauma. And so anyway, there's a real crisis, men, in missions. I mean, it's a crisis. Let me give you 2 illustrations of the crisis. Number 1, Worldview Ministries. Have you ever heard of them? Ken Fielder. Great group. If you're looking at a mission conference speaker or missionary, Ken Fielder. Their primary thing is translating, and it's called Worldview Ministries. And they estimate there are 3,800 languages that do not have one word of the scripture in their language. 3,800. Like, if we just stop and let that settle over us, like that should bother us. Just think if that language was English. If we were one of those languages, we would be hopelessly lost. And in most of those 3,800 languages, there's no one who has their sights set on learning that language so they can translate the scripture into it. Another illustration of the crisis, and you can look, our ministry, my wife and I's ministry is called Miss Assist. It's one word, and you can find it on Facebook. If you look for Miss Space Assist, you get a lady who owns a cleaning company, like in Oklahoma or somewhere. But if you put the 2 together, you can read. I just posted yesterday where I'm going to get this number from. In the broad evangelical world, and we're not evangelicals, but in the broad missionary evangelical world, and these statistics would include us, in 1996, and you can read about this, it's a short posting on our Facebook page, they estimated 20 missionaries a day leave the mission field. A day. That's a lot. And if you look at our Facebook page, you can see where they got that. So Table Talk is designed to take some of those issues and try to close the chasm so that we can be addressing this missionary emergency. And so, as an example, and there's a brochure of my wife and I's ministry on the table at the back. It's actually about missionary care. It's my wife and I's ministry. There's a mistake on it I discovered yesterday. I'm making a lot of mistakes these days. But anyway, our Miss Assist email address is .org. It is not .com, but those are our numbers. That is it tells about our ministry. And so one of the things that gave birth to Table Talks is, well, what are some of the issues where there's a chasm of misunderstanding between the real life experience of missionaries and pastors? Because, and by the way, pastors, most missionaries will agree with 95% of what we're saying today, but they're probably not going to tell you that they agree. They're probably going to say, yeah, I'm sure there's some missionaries struggling with these things, but I'm not one of them. And someone raised their hand. I was in Meriden, And a lady raised her hand at a question and answer time and said, so Pastor, are you trying to say missionaries lie? And I said, no. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is that we answer questions to the degree that we think the person asking really wants to know. You know, when the lady in Dunkin' Donuts says, how you doing today? We think, she doesn't really care. Do they really want to, and can they handle the answer? You know, sometimes people can't handle the answer. So missionaries answer in the same way. They're not being dishonest. And with all due respect, I have the utmost respect for both of you. I've met Pastor Hammond a couple times before. Pastor, never met you. You come from a godly heritage. I have no doubt, questions about you. But I just want to say, it's pretty hard to tell most of us pastors that there's something we don't know. And I'm guilty. I was served as a pastor almost 39 years. And for someone to look at a pastor and say, Pastor, with all due respect, you have no idea what you're talking about. Well, and I mean that saying it kindly. We've had a lot of people in our churches tell us that unkindly, but kindly. So when you talk about this chasm of misunderstanding, the response of a lot of pastors is, I don't think there's a chasm of misunderstanding. I understand missions, but many of us really don't. You ask the mission, they say, yeah, tell them about the chasm. Do you think oh, no, I don't personally, because there's a little bit of politics in play. So we identify some of the issues, and you have quite a concise outline on the subject of trauma in 2 sessions. So the issue here is this. This is an example. Trauma is an example of one of the challenges that missionaries face, typically called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We choose to identify it now. Pastor, we're learning, and it's always good to learn, right? We choose now to refer to it as post-traumatic stress. And there's a few reasons. Number one, even within the PTSD community, there's a debate. Should you call this PTSD, which stands for disorder, or should you call it PTSI, which stands for injury? They debate this. It's probably changing to I don't know. But here's the reason for that. If you said to Rodney after on the side, hey, what is Chris's problem? If he said, well, he has a disorder, you'd think, wow, that's terrible. But if he said, well, Chris's problem is he has an injury, you'd say, oh, good, I hope he gets better. That's their debate. We just choose to talk about post-traumatic stress. We're not clinicians. We don't pretend to be clinicians. We don't diagnose people exactly, honestly, whatever that all entails and means. We just simply know, and we don't want to label people. It reminds me of when I was pastoring in Maine, and we had a boy in our Awana club many years ago, and he came to me, and you know, at that time in Awana, it's not an endorsement of Awana or anything like that, but in Awana, they allowed you 2 one-word helps per section. You got to say this verse, this, you get 2 one-word helps. That was the rule. And this boy looked up at me and said, Pastor, I can't do that. I said, why? He said, because I'm a C. And I said to him, what's a C? He said, well, at school, you got your A's, your B's, your C's, your D's. I'm a C. I could never do that. We don't pretend to be professionals about post-traumatic stress, but the idea of labeling, you have this, you have that, we have an aversion to it. There's a quote there in your book from Daniel Berger. He said, quote, we can choose to label individuals who struggle to deal with the harsh realities of life as abnormal, or we can recognize our common human tendencies and choose to genuinely love them and help them to find grace and peace in spite of their tragedies. Amazing statement, next one. But approaching people as abnormal or ill when they're hurting and traumatized has historically failed to help either the one suffering or the society in which they live. The federal government, I think at last count, had over 200 different programs for dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, they call it. And I don't know if you saw this, Pastor, in the last 2 weeks, some news came out about a new drug to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. I saw this article. So what we're going to do in these 2 sessions, and I'm going to talk for about 25 more minutes and stop. That leaves about 10 or 15 a session, and you can interrupt us anytime. And by the way, you can say, I disagree. We're not trying that. We're just trying to generate discussion. So what is post-traumatic stress? How does it manifest itself in the life of a missionary? And then what can we do? What can we do to help them? So the question becomes, well, what is post-traumatic stress? So here's how it works. First, something abnormal happens. Could be a crisis, happens to a person, or it involves them. A car accident. It could be a crisis in the life of someone that's close to someone. I did not have the car accident, but someone very close to me did. It could be a repeated or continual exposure to something hurtful, negative, demeaning, unethical. This is really important because sometimes missionaries find themselves in a continually repeated, accepted, unethical environment. For many people, if that become missionaries, that becomes very stressful. Or it could be something that if it was a one-off thing, no big deal. Like a drip of water. If we walked out here and it was raining and it dripped on our shoulder, we'd say, oh, look at that mess that just made. But you know what they call it if they lay you on your back and strap you down and have one drip every 10 seconds? It's called the Chinese water torture. So this stress can be generated by a number of things. So something abnormal happens. Is the person abnormal? Is the person abnormal?
No.
The answer is no. Probably one of the most relieving things to a person dealing with post-traumatic stress to hear is, sir, you're perfectly normal. In fact, we had a man visiting in our church at home a few weeks ago, and I don't know how we got in a discussion about post-traumatic stress, and he said this to me. He said, Chris, the thing that helped me the most was when my pastor looked at me and said, well, you're normal. An abnormal thing happened, and you reacted in a perfectly normal way. So second, I'll get a little ahead of myself. So what makes something traumatic? It happens all of a sudden. It's severe, it's unexpected, or it's cumulative. And what happens is our normal coping mechanism, they're not sufficient to handle the event. So you could say it was more than we could handle at that moment. And, missionaries visit churches and we have them come up and we say things like this. These are the cream of the crop. These are God's choice servants. All meant well. And you men know this. Look, missionaries are people just like you and I. They're not superhuman. They're not super anything. We all need to accept that we could come into some traumatic event in our life that's more than we could handle at any given moment, because it happens to everyone. So the second thing is there's a response to being traumatized. So what are some of the common responses? Trauma happens. So I have a list of them there. Fear, anger. Where am I? I'm on page number 4 at the top. There's a response to being traumatized. Fear, anger, irritability, detachment, loss of appetite, headache, and there's a whole list. Sadness, worry. So post-traumatic stress is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And again, let me just emphasize that to a person dealing with post-traumatic stress, that's probably, I'm aside of the Word of God and the work of the Holy Spirit, of course, and prayer and that, the most helpful thing to them is, look, you're perfectly normal. That's the way we react to abnormal events. So Daniel Berger again, he says that it's an impairing event. It begins with a normal reaction to an abnormal event. Berger says an impairing event in a person's normal reaction to it. So a few things about trauma. They're listed there. There are 5. Number 1, it comes in many forms. Amazing. What traumatizes one doesn't traumatize another. Some table talks, we go somewhere for lunch. So if we were on our way to lunch today and we came upon a terrible, really, really bad accident, some of us might be frozen in place right there. And someone might, Chris, we're going to lunch. And I might say, I'm not going anywhere. We all react differently. So it comes in many forms. Number 2, that which traumatizes one doesn't traumatize another. The reaction can come long after the trauma. Very important thing with missionaries. We'll get to this in my second session. Trauma in the life of a missionary candidate needs to be explored. Childhood trauma and teen trauma, because the reactions may come out when the pressures of missionary life begin to overwhelm them.
Exactly.
Number 4, an event may not have been considered traumatic at the time. You know, some things, for example, let's just continue with the same theme. If you grew up in a bad environment, it's a normal way of life to you. Yeah, we get up every morning and mom and dad scream and yell at each other. It's just the way that it is. Well, at the time, at 7, I didn't think this was trauma. If you said, are you traumatized? I said, no, but I'm looking for some breakfast. But down the road, when you realize how abnormal that was, it can sort of begin to cave in on you, and then you can feel it. Number 5, every person dealing with post-traumatic stress doesn't experience the same number of responses. There's no exact set criteria, which is why there's so many different, what they call treatments. You'll see a quote on the bottom of page 4. Bezel A. Vanderkolk, not a Christian. And I wrote to the president of a mission after my first seminar I ever went to on post-traumatic stress. I wrote to the president of a mission that you might know if I named him and said, listen, I'm looking for some more resources on post-traumatic stress. He sent me a long list and then said, none of these are Christian. And the reason is because there's not a lot of Christian material on it. It's growing. There's more. Vanderkolk, very interesting guy. This is what he says. His book is called The Body Keeps Score. He says trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way the mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think, but also our capacity to think. So some basics there about trauma. So here's the third. For some, their responses to trauma become a regular part of life. For some people, our normal reaction to an abnormal event comes and goes. We reacted. I was very, very afraid. But in a very short time, I move on. I just move on. For some, the responses occur, but they lessen, and eventually they more or less dissipate. But then there are some people who they continue to re-experience and relive that crisis. They continue to relive it. Now, you'll see on page 5 in the middle a few things about those responses. They're involuntary. Like a person who's dealing with post-traumatic stress doesn't say, this would be a good time to react to my trauma from 10 years ago. Right. They're involuntary. They're unpredictable. Often they're unpredictable, the responses. They're uncontrollable. When someone says to them, well, why don't you just stop reacting that way? The Lord can help a person to do that, but without the Lord's help to do that, they'd say, well, I don't do this on purpose. Like, I don't all of a sudden decide to act this way. And they're often brought on by triggers. We have a missionary with our mission who experienced very traumatic mission field experience. And in fact, sometimes he's one of the facilitators. I teach a session on trauma. He gives his testimony from the mission field, and it's very powerful. He lives in Iowa, so he's not right down the road, so he's not often able to be with us. The Lord willing, I'll be out there with him on Monday. But he in this traumatic place experience he had, it's a long testimony and story. For some reason, the person who was the key to inducing the trauma decided that on this missionary compound of multiple buildings, every door would be painted green. He wasn't of the varieties of the spice of life kind of guy. Our friend, after the traumatic experience, came back to the United States, realized he was triggered by green doors. He'd be going through life and see a green door. And all of a sudden, some of those responses would begin to come out in him. So he and I, his wife, Rodney, were at a seminar on post-traumatic stress. And it was at a camp in New England. And so here we are at this camp, and this guy, his name is Sam. Sam walking up to we learned this after. Yeah. Sam's walking up to the main meeting room where this. He got to the main meeting room, and the door was green. And later he told, we didn't know at the time. He said, I froze. I started panicking. I started breathing very heavy. I didn't know if I was going to go in or not. Now, to you and I, we think, well, that sounds perfectly silly, right? Sounds perfectly silly. But it triggered him back to his post-traumatic stress experience. So
Pastor, what you're saying is he had a vivid memory
that became a present reality in his mind, and it was so adverse and negative that it caused a hard physiological response to that. And
Right.
that wasn't just all in his head. His body was responding physiologically in a negative way. Because I've had triggers,
Right.
being back in the States, having gone through different levels of traumatic stress as a missionary as well. And in the States, when I was triggered, I had, like what you described, a panic. My heart raced. I had some sort of an acid that rushed in my stomach that caused a pain and created eventually an acid reflux that I would suffer through. And that's a very real thing. That's
Right.
not something that you can say, I'm going to limit that to my thinking, relegate that to my thinking. That has a serious, prolonged physiological effect.
Yeah. And it's embarrassing. Another element of it, it's embarrassing. If you're our friend Sam, he'd say, so do you admit to people green doors are triggers? No, I have great, the Lord has led Sam to some good biblical counseling in this. I'm not betraying his confidence. He would tell you this in way more depth than I am. And the Lord's really amazing what the Lord's doing to help him now. He's helping others. The point is, it's real. The response is real. So on the bottom of page 5, PTS in the life of a missionary. So these are some examples of crisis events in the life of a missionary. Deputation. You ever think about deputation as a crisis event? So my wife and I travel a lot now. For information, I'm 62. We left home. Today's Friday. We left home a week ago today. In our first 4 days on the road, we slept in 4 different places. And we don't tow kids along. So for some, and I'm just illustrating, for some people, deputation is like an adventure. For some people, it's a cumulative, traumatizing for them. So you can see, departure. I'm on deputation for 4 years, now it's time to go. For some missionaries, traumatizing. It's a abnormal event to all of a sudden leave. Kith and kin, I guess they say. The normal reaction. The birth of a child, or arrival on the field. In Tanzania, where I visited Rodney a number of times, India, where I've been a number of times, the door on the plane opens, and it's sensory overload. The sight, the smell, the sound, all those things. For some people, for some people, they say, well, I never had any missionary tell me this. For some, they say, that smells like home. I don't know if they do that. For most, they say, what was that? What is that? Birth of a child in the third world. Death in your passport country. I'm here, they died there. Earthquake, hurricane, betrayal, assault. Think of this, man. This is a documented fact. I doubt there's a crime that is committed to people perpetrated by in the United States that has not been perpetrated on a missionary on the field. Like, the stories are horrific, to be quite honest with you. They're horrific. Burglary, robbery, political upheaval. So those are events. How about exposures, power outages, expectations, deception? I had a man tell me the other night, you'll find this interesting, I had a man tell me the other night in a church after we made a missionary care presentation, whose daughter is a missionary, married to a third-generation missionary. And that helps. When you're married to a third-generation missionary, it helps. His daughter told him one of the most stressful events in her life, once a month, is writing a prayer letter, knowing most of the readers are going to evaluate it to see whether they think they're getting their money's worth. Amazing. He told me that from his daughter. I didn't make it up. Financial shortfalls, sickness, death, furlough, loneliness, supply shortages. So, as I've already said, the trauma that a missionary deals with may have taken place long before they were saved, but it's triggered by activities and events on the field. Number 2, they may not be connected, difficulty they're facing, the post-traumatic stress with a traumatic event. And number three, missionaries face unique things that are traumatic. For some missionaries, their day-to-day life can be filled with traumatic events. For some, it's one traumatic event to another. So I often illustrate this way. If we went to Lowe's, just picking Lowe's today, if there's a Lowe's nearby, and in the process of being there, we discover this salesperson lied to me. Now look, we know we get lied to, but in a Judeo-Christian culture, you're not supposed to do that. At least, don't admit it. So if we track down the manager and I said, Mr. Jones, the manager, Billy down in the garden department, he just lied to me. Well, what did he do? The manager might say, terrible. Judeo-Christian culture, terrible, terrible. Inside he might be saying, what, do you live under a rock? But on the surface, and he might say, I'll tell you what we're going to do. What were you buying? Oh, you were buying 10 bags of mulch. You wanted that kind of mulch, and he told you we don't have any more of that coming in, and you saw them unloading it down in the thing. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a 20% discount just to make it up to you, right? So what percentage of people, this isn't rehearsed, but I've asked before. So if I'm a missionary in Tanzania, East Africa, I step outside my door, what percentage of people are lying to me?
I would say by experience and by living there 13 years, talking to many, many missionaries across East Africa, it is very safe to assume everyone is lying to you. Or there's a percentage of people who are telling you the truth to get the opportunity to lie to you later.
Okay, so I don't want to call myself the devil's advocate. So what you mean is Tanzanians are really, really bad people? You shouldn't speak of Tanzanians that way.
Right. So I would answer to that they are a product of their communist, socialistic, tribalistic upbringing from cradle to college, and they are the depravity of man's heart is revealed in every culture as a common cultural occurrence. So it would be perfectly normal and acceptable in their culture, doesn't make it right, whereas we would accept sinful, depraved cultural norms in our society. Either we would accept them or just learn to respond to them properly and just keep moving on.
Right, so we're not speaking bad of nationals. I don't think you can
Right.
say nationals anymore. We're saying there are certain cultural things that you encounter. It was in a foreign country, talking with the missionary wife, actually. We were having a little chat. It was all appropriate, environment and condition. And she said to me, she described to me the trauma of having a baby in that country. And she said, Pastor, I told them, look, I don't want you to do that to my baby. And the way was, well, we do this for every baby. Yeah, well, we don't do that in America. And I'm kind of just giving my explanation. Well, you're not in America, and that's why American babies have the problems they have, because you don't do it this way. And for some young mothers, that's what we call like water off a duck's back. For some, very, very, very traumatizing. So in the subject of missionary care, coming alongside and ministering to missionaries, traumatic stress is just one issue. It's one issue. There are loads of issues that missionaries deal with. We talk about this one because so many missionaries deal with post-traumatic stress and very stressful issues, but also to just sort of I don't want to say enlighten, gentlemen, as if you're not intelligent, but just to pull the curtain back a little bit on some of the challenging things that missionaries face. We just picked out post-traumatic stress as one of those particular things because it's very, very, very common for missionaries. Sometimes I'm going to tell you this story, and then this session will be over, generate a little discussion here, and then take a little break. Sometimes I illustrate it this way. I go to the Whateversville Christian School. There were 20 students there. I was the valedictorian. I go to college and I land at the Pensacola Christian College. Now, I'm not promoting Pensacola. All I'm saying is, guess what? There are 5,000 students there. So I went from 20, and I was the star of the basketball team back where they were 20, by the way. I landed at Pensacola Christian College. There's 5,000 students. There's more young ladies than there are young men. I'm a young man, and I look around, and I think, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. Meet a nice girl, fall in love, and date under artificial conditions. You know what I mean by that. It's artificial. It's not real. And I'm not criticizing PCC or any Christian college for the rules that they put, yeah, but it's not real. Then I graduate, and 60 days later or less, I get married. I go on a honeymoon. Not too many months later or weeks later, I go to candidate school. I get accepted as a missionary, and now we're missionaries. We're out on deputation. A few months later, we're going to have a baby. Now I have a baby while we're on deputation. Maybe 2. Mm-hmm. Then after 2, at best case scenario, 2 years deputation, 3, 4 years, now we're going. And we get there. And the door opens. And by the way, the husband's pretty excited about this. She is, but he's really excited about this. He's been communicating with this brother. We're coming to work with you. We can't wait to get there. We're there. I've slept for 2 days, so now I feel better. And I say to my partner, take me out and show it to me. And in this back room here is this young girl, young woman, no disrespect intended of her, who's hardly been away from home, who has not established marriage routines, who developed marriage routines on the road, who had a baby on the road, maybe 2-week break at home, and then hit the road again. And then deputation, and here I am. And many of those young Christian women, and this is not unkind of them, it's one example. There are many other examples that involve men, has no idea what's wrong with her and starts to think, maybe I'm not spiritual. Maybe I don't love God. Maybe I wasn't called. Maybe I lied to the people who I told I was looking forward to coming here. But I can hear my baby crying. Uh-oh, is she going to need to go to the doctor? Is there a doctor here? And it just, and according to that statistic, you can look at it on Facebook again, where they got the number. And so 20% of missionaries are going to pull the plug today. Based on that, and you can read where, like I said, where it came from. Okay, so we're going to go to, after a little break here, this is not break, this is time for a little of your input, thoughts, agreement, disagreement. We're going to go to, so what can we do? Like, what can we do? What would help here? But first, your comments, your questions, your thoughts, men, you can agree, you can disagree. You're not going to offend us at all.
A question.
Yes.
I understand that post-traumatic stress can be caused by a wide variety of different stressors.
Yes.
Are some sort of the top, most common, most likely predictors of post-traumatic stress?
Causes, you mean?
Yeah. Causes.
Okay, so let's turn to a missionary. You see, man, I have this disadvantage. I never have been a missionary in a foreign field. I'm the director of missionary care, but haven't been there. But I don't go around defending myself. But missionaries will say to you, it's amazing what he understands about being a missionary. It's just the grace of God. But when we have a missionary sitting there, I always defer right to them. I mean, in terms of lived on a foreign field. So give us the top few causes of stress for missionaries.
Okay, so what I mean by the top 3 is not, these are the top 3 most powerful traumatizing events, because that's going to be not as far-reaching among all the missionaries.